other words, that's the first thing you've got to deal with when you're coming out of a situation like this, is the feelings. Now, these are typical types of feelings. Paranoia about the group, about God, fear that former members may be out to get them, inability to find or maintain employment, feeling lonely, lacking self-confidence, feeling disillusioned, having nightmares, unexplained phobias, confusion, depression, dissociation, anxiety, suicidal, homicidal, when they go to drugs and alcohol. How many of you have been in that cultic situation? So there's probably a third of people. Does that list ring any bells with you all? Let's look at the next list. Typically, I think one of the more common symptoms in a situation like this is lack of feelings, tiredness, inability to feel deeply about anything. These are all symptoms of what's called dissociation. When I left the group, I felt stunned, I felt numb, I felt like things were kind of in a dream-like state, that things seemed unreal, seemed very unreal. And I was very tired. And so I slept a lot. And I thought I had a virus. I did. It was the cold virus. In other words, I could not pin my feelings to what had happened. And I think a lot of people come out with these vague feelings, feeling stunned and numb and tired and confused and depressed. And, raise your hands if those are feelings. Any other feelings? Yes?
Does it make a difference whether the group pushed you out or whether the person went on their own as to what kind of feelings they had?
Well, it could, but what were your feelings?
Oh, my feelings right now? Well, I left voluntarily. Well, sort of left voluntarily. They precipitated it by we have a heresy trial for the Jehovah's Witnesses. But I remember my main feeling was grief over the loss of relationships.
Okay.
Right after I had written my letter and turned it in, and I knew that they had read an announcement in all the local congregations not to have
Okay,
work.
so your feeling was grief. How about some other people? What was your feelings? Any?
Other than what's up there?
No, to confirm whatever. What were your feelings?
I was very confused. I
Confused.
didn't understand what they had done to me and how. It took me years to really learn how it unfolded.
Good. Any other feelings? Yes.
Anger.
Anger.
Lots of anger.
Lots of anger. Now, 2 years after I left the group, I was in my doctoral studies at University of Pittsburgh. And we had these group experiential exercises where we would talk about what was going on in the group and what we were feeling. And I was never talking about what my feelings were. And so one day, one of the girls in this group said, "What are you feeling?" I said, "Nothing." And so this became a process of over several weeks that more and more people were getting angry at me, saying, "You just can't be sitting in this group day after day after day and not feeling anything." But you know what? I wasn't lying. And it made me realize that somewhere down the line, my feelings just took a vacation. And that's one of the classic symptoms of so many people that have been in groups like this that have been traumatized. They can't feel. They can't feel. And I eventually came out of it, but it was kind of frightening to realize that I'd gone several years without feeling. And as I look back on my cult experience, we had such a narrow view of righteousness that we never showed anxiety or fear or depression or anger. And so when you left, those feelings just didn't come. And so instead, you show kind of the absence of the feelings. You're cut off. Many people feel cut off. That is, in the sense, they feel numb. They feel stunned. They feel like they're in a dreamlike phase or whatever. So that's the kind of the classic symptoms of what happens to people that come out. Of course, unwelcome thoughts. You can have hallucinations. Some people can feel they're going crazy. The next overhead, please. And a continuation of those. Detachment, numbing. Some of the painful memories of the group come back to you. You feel like a robot. You feel like you're in shock. One lady said she felt confused or disoriented. Many things like that. Okay, next overhead. You all saw that last night, right? Okay. Those feelings come from a combination of things. Basically, from being cut off from this, from being cut off from this, from being cut off from this. In other words, you're like one of those astronauts that is out repairing the satellite. And the rope that they're attached to comes loose. And they tumble and drift off into space. In a sense, this is almost what happens when you're coming out of a cult, that you can't be reattached to anything. Yourself, to others, or the group. And so that's why we can have a myriad of feelings when you're coming out of the group. In fact, the feeling state, or these symptoms, are the first thing that one has to deal with. Most people, it's going to be a long time, months, weeks, depending. And you really begin to fit the pieces together of what happened to you. In other words, the feelings come before you put it together. In recovery, you first of all have to deal with the fact that there's a lot of feelings involved in being in a situation like that. Now, no matter how one leaves a group, and you can look at your handouts here, the page of the healing process. No matter how you left the group, whether you had some professional counseling, whether you walked out, whether you were excommunicated, whether you ended up in the hospital, or whatever, you eventually have to come to some sort of post-cult rehabilitation process, whether it's formal or informal. Whether you go to a professional therapist, go to a rehabilitation center, work it out with your friends, work it out with yourself. Recovery has to deal with these issues. And what are those issues? There's psychological issues of dependency possible depression, anxiety, psychosis, relationship issues, anger issues, issues of control. There's family issues to deal with. One thing that we find out in the cults is that for every one person in the cult, there are 5 loved ones outside of the cult that have been adversely affected. In other words, if you are the only family member that joins, then it disrupts the whole family system. And so dealing with that family again has to be faced. There's counseling, maybe custody issues. The kids are in the cult, or the kids left the cult, or the parents are back in the cult. Family issues must be dealt with. There's spiritual issues that have to be dealt with. The nature of God, the nature of man. What's this whole balance between submission and authority, grace and works, going back to church, or if you're not a Christian, going back to your original religion, choices. There's all kinds of social issues, finding friends, relationships. What do I do with my career? What do I do about my health? Should I speak out? Should I get an attorney? Or whatever. Let me tell you in no uncertain terms that recovery will be incomplete and will be postponed and will go on and will never be complete unless those issues are faced. In other words, the tough news about recovery is you can't walk away from it. You've got to face the pain. You've got to face up to what happened to you at every level in that group. Psychological, family, spiritual, social, whatever. You have to look at the experience on every level. In other words, it's like walking around with a thorn in your foot. No matter how long you walk, that thorn's going to stay in your foot. And it's, well, do you want to pull it out today or wait till it gets infected? And maybe we'll have to take part of your foot with it. We have had people that have come to Wellspring 10 or 15 years after they left the cult. Because the issues were not faced, and not always are you not facing the issues because you're running away from them. No one's been there to tell you what you to face. We had a guy here recently that's been out of a cult for about 15 years. He's been in and out of, I don't know how many hospital programs, 4 or 5 or 6. He was in so much pain when he left the cult that a lot of people go into drugs and alcohol after being traumatized by that because they hurt so bad. They take something to help them feel better. So he started drinking. So he ended up in drug and alcohol treatment centers, inpatient units. And so he would talk to his therapist. Yeah, I know I got a drinking problem, but let me tell you what happened in this group. Well, let's not talk about your drinking problem. Or no, let's not talk about the group, let's talk about your drinking problem. So they took the alcohol away, so he's going back to face the original pain. He can't stand it anymore, he doesn't know how to cope, he drinks again, he ends up in another hospital. Now this guy had been in 5 hospital programs before he finally came to Wellspring. And we kept asking him, like, making sure we really hear you. No one in 5 hospitalization programs over a 15-year period ever addressed your cult issue. Nope. No one even listened to your story? Nope. So because the pain was not faced, he continued to not be able to deal with life. And I think there's a lot of people, and you probably know a lot of people out there that have been so devastated by experiences like this that they can't cope. They just simply can't cope. In other words, this is more than a spiritual issue. This has to do with whether you could get out of bed in the morning and put on your pants and go to work and raise a family and take care of a home or whatever. I have seen so many people so disabled that they can't do anything. How many of you know people like that? Sure. We're not talking about some idealistic horror stories. These things happen all the time. And these people need help. They need treatment. Yes, sir?
There was a lady that we were in contact with that was counseling another cultist. And I'm not exactly sure how it happened, but what had happened was she spent 2 intensive days with this particular cultist, going through the Bible, going through all sorts of different things, documenting the errors of the particular group. And when this particular cultist finally left her, walked out of the house, and was getting ready to get into her car and drive off, she said specifically that she told my Christian friend that she literally, after she found out that this organization she was with was not of God, that really had led her astray, and had inflicted a lot of wounds on her, she literally had to go out and touch the trees, feel the grass, look up in the sky, and actually feel things to see that they're actually real, because her whole worldview had been so tremendously shaken. I just thought I'd offer that,
Yeah, that's a great illustration. And it's not that unusual that people reorienting have a very, very difficult transition to face. Let's look at the next page. It talks about the recovery process. There are predictable stages. It's also on the overhead, and it's also on your sheet. There are also predictable stages that you go through. Like I said before, the first thing you're going to feel are some of these feelings. Loneliness, numb, anxious, angry, disillusioned, confused, whatever. Everybody's different. The first thing you're dealing with is feelings. Now, the first clue as to really where you are in your recovery has to do with where your mind is in time. Where your mind is in time. And so up here at the top of the page, you've got past, present, and future. The past, if your mind is still locked in the past, you're asking questions like this. Is this group really a cult? Maybe I could have tried harder. I'm so confused. Are my needs really being met in the group? Something is wrong. In other words, you're still stuck in the cult. Your mind is still stuck in the cult. You can't figure it out. You're confused. Well, maybe I should have left. Maybe I shouldn't have. I just don't know. Well, maybe there were some good things. Maybe God was there. I mean, these are the kind of things you're hearing. These people are stuck. It's just like there's big ropes tied around their ankles, and they can't move on in life. And what are the feelings at that stage? Well, like we talked about, anxiety, depression, disillusionment, numbness. Forget the assessment tools. That's has to do with what a psychologist kind of test they might give to a person at those stages to help find out where they are. And the counseling goals at that point is finish the exit counseling. That's the first stage in recovery. In other words, you can't talk about your childhood, or you can't talk about, well, let's go find you a job or whatever. I mean, those are things that you could do to kind of support the person. But you've got to unlock this mind control business. Let's go back to this over here. Whoops, the one with the circles. Whoops, sorry. This has got to be unlocked. We went over this last night. I just want to review a few things on why some people leave. Okay? And it's good to help them understand the dynamics of the group, help them understand this system. Some people leave because they simply get tired of doing the routine. They can't do it anymore. They've confessed and they've worked hard and they've prayed hard and they've given everything they've got and they feel like they're a failure and they leave. So they leave because they just give up. Some people leave. You remember the big syringe I drew in this little boy last night? How many were there last night? Okay, most of you were. Some leave because the syringe seems to be dry. It's not like they're trying so hard. It's just, gee, I'm just not getting anything out of this anymore. It's not that they're saying the group is wrong. It's just like, something's wrong. I'm just not getting the buzz. And so they leave for that reason. Okay? So everybody leaves for different reasons. Now, some people leave because, the guru gets a new revelation. And it's so bizarre that the guy just can't deal with it. Like, wait a minute, this is getting me nuts. In other words, something happens in the group. And so the information they're getting changes. And they leave for that reason. So in other words, not everybody leaves the cult for the same reasons. Now some, are always in this tug of war between, the pruned, freeze-dried, super sanctified self in the cult versus the old self. And, the walls here are constantly trying to be pushed out. And someday, just spontaneously, people just wake up and they just say, hey, I've always liked music and fishing in Colorado and the trout streams. And it's like, gee, I'm going fishing. It's like nothing really, they're not particularly tired of doing the routine and running the treadmill, trying harder. They're still getting a buzz out of the group. The group didn't change. But it's just like suddenly some of that part of your past that's been so buried for so long just pops out. And it just seems so clear to them. And they say, man, I'm going fishing. And they're off. And then some people, mom or dad or somebody comes in from this wall on the outside and gives information. And then nothing fits anymore, and so they get this new information and say, gosh, this group doesn't quite make sense, and so they leave. They leave. So the first steps in recovery is helping them explain this system and then helping them see under what conditions did they leave. Because in every one of those conditions that I described to you, it's like the system really didn't get shattered. They got out of the cult, but the cult didn't get out of them. So in other words, the guy that suddenly just wanted to go fishing in Colorado for a couple of weeks, he probably turned around and said, oh man, that's a great church. I know I'm being disobedient, but what the heck, I'm off fishing. Yeah, the guy's a prophet. He needs help. Or the guy that says, man, I've been working 18 hours a week, or 18 hours a day with this church. I've been praying and giving everything, and I just feel like I failed God. He needs help, but for different reasons. Or the person where something happens in here, you get new information, the group gets a new revelation, and then you're totally confused that, man, this was God's group, and, I don't know. What's wrong? I can't. So regardless of how a person leaves, there's so much of this system intact that what often happens is, if you can imagine this is like a little electrical plug. Let's just imagine two prongs coming up here. You just take your little plug and walk around, and hey, that looks like a good group. And you just fire the system up somewhere else. You know, you can't wait for the buzz, and you know, and work real hard, because that's what it means to be dedicated. So the first part in recovery is you got to dismantle this system for them. In other words, it's just not enough to say, well, it's fine to go trout fishing in Colorado. It's not enough to say, well, you know, the buzz doesn't work, and well, let's find a new way to buzz you. It's every part of that system is wrong. And so you've got to show that person it's wrong to have these kind of walls around you. It's wrong to be crushed, to have your personality crushed like this. It's wrong to devote your entire life to confession and purity. It's wrong for me to keep talking without drinking. It's wrong to have a belief system that is unquestioning, that accounts for every part of a person's life. In other words, the whole system has to start to be dismantled. Bit by bit. You look at this, you look at the syringe, you look at the wall around you, you look at how you were crushed. You know, there's more to life than prayer, reading, Bible study, giving your money, evangelism, discipleship. People need to learn that your repertoire of human behaviors is more than those things. Yes, ma'am?
How long does it take for an individual to get like this? No, to get, I mean, how long does it take for them to be programmed? Yeah, I mean,
cultist?
Yeah.
Oh, you can do it in a couple of weeks, probably.
What?
Oh, sure. People can, depending on the type of group, people can be totally into a system like this within weeks. Even days. It's amazing. And it ain't that easy to get them out of it. In other words, recovery is really taking the snips and scissors to that system. Well, yeah, I mean, I don't like the term deprogramming because it, you know, you have the connotations of bands driving up and snatching people off the street, whatever. It's much better to work with a person that's left and wants to hear this stuff. I just think you're always in a losing situation when you're trying to give information to a person that doesn't want to hear it. You're always in the driver's seat when they want to hear it. Even if deprogramming was legal, I don't think I'd do it, because why beat your head against the wall? I mean, you're kind of doing the same thing to them that the cult did to you. You know, you're forcing information down an unwilling throat, and that's just not my style. Yes?
I'm curious about the fellow that went off fishing for a moment. It seems like it's sort of like analogous to the man that is married for 20 years and then suddenly just flips out and buys a Ferrari and leaves his wife and kids, you know? Like people's ability to just suddenly just sever ties for like almost no reason overnight. And what you're saying is there's still that backlog. You got to go back and face it somewhere. But is that a similar idea? I mean, some people just seem to be able to do that.
Well, yeah, I think that's a little different, because I think of the guy that went fishing. He's always loved fishing. He's done fishing, but for some reason it just was buried all those years in the cult. And then all of a sudden, bang, it just pops into my mind. This is ridiculous. I'm going to go fishing. I enjoy this. And yet you still buy the whole rest of the program.
But he's starting to reclaim himself.
Yeah, that's the first step, and that's a good point. It's an excellent point, what she said. At least the guy's starting to reclaim himself. He went fishing. He did something that was truly him. Now, the cult would label that as backsliding and worldly and everything. But you know something? Let me tell you something that's not maybe said enough. God wants us to enjoy life. It says so in the Bible. He richly gave us all things to enjoy. That's right. Joy. I mean, when God created the heavens and the earth and He looked down at the end of each creation day, He said, hey, it's good stuff. Yes?
How long does this recovery take place?
Oh, how long does this take place? How long does it take? It's dependent on a number of factors. How much help you're getting. Okay. How long you've been in. That's right. How much energy you have to devote to recovery. It's very interesting, and I'll tell you the truth. Now, I didn't have any help. My recovery program was, pick yourself up by the bootstraps and stumble across little tidbits of information over a period of years until it finally came together. I was in for 7.5 years, and the final piece to the puzzle occurred 7 years after I got out. Now that's with no help. That's your own do-it-yourself rehabilitation program. I don't recommend it. That's why I started Wellspring. I thought, good grief, so many of my friends stumbled around for years trying to figure this whole thing out. Why not systematically really deal with a lot of these issues? So I think that speeds the process up. But I would be a fool to say that after a 2-week or a 3-week program at Wellspring, people are totally recovered. But I think that one of the guidelines that I like to use is, it's like if a person has broken their leg and they've had their leg set in a cast. When they're ready to get up out of bed and walk with crutches, then you know they're on their way. And it's like when people leave Wellspring, if they can walk and if they know which direction they're going, then you feel very good. They see a future, they see a hope, there's life in front of them, and that's good. Yeah, they're still hurting a little bit. That kind of leads into the next point. So you've got to dissect all of this. Show how all of this, in a sense, was not healthy or was wrong. Then, when this is all dissected, and you really see it for what it is, what do you feel?
Relief?
Angry.
Mm-hmm.
Betrayed. Some people might feel relief for a day or two. And then it hits them. Boom. I have seen people so angry at this point that it's like I'm dealing with an alien. I mean, I haven't seen anything like it in my life on the movies or whatever. It's just like when a person finally comes in touch with the total violation of self, of the rape of the mind and the spirit, when people get in touch with that, their anger is just absolutely incalculable. Ballistic. It's just unbelievable. It's rage. That's when real recovery starts. Because you're now letting go. You're now seeing this for what it is. The anger, the grief, and then you're starting. You've shifted in time. You were in the past. Now you're in the present. In other words, you're talking about what they did to you then. In other words, you're no longer thinking, should I be in the group? You're talking about this or that. You are in the here and now. You were dealing with your feelings. Oh my goodness, I've got friends back there. How could this have happened to me? I feel like a fool. It's like you're just overwhelmed. So people have to be given permission at this stage to really grieve, to really talk it through. Some people have given their life for this. Some people have given their fortunes, their inheritance. It's just amazing what they realize they've lost. And you've got to let them run this through. And that's very interesting. Even though people are getting better, look at the feeling state. They're still anxious, they're still angry, they're still sad, they're still maybe fear, but it's for totally different reasons. In other words, you may not be feeling better, but you're getting better because you're starting to work through some of these issues.
But aren't there positive feelings also? All the feelings that you've listed there are negative, but aren't there positive feelings also?
Well, the purpose of this graph is to illustrate to people that you can have negative feelings well into the third stage of recovery. But there are some positive feelings that especially start to occur at this level. Okay. And then you can begin to then work with that person a little bit more detail on how were you recruited, what buttons did they push. They really begin to look at things like that. And then there's kind of a sense of closure about those things. And then people start looking toward the future. And that's when I think people are really into recovery or going to be okay, when they start thinking about job and schooling and going back and seeing mom and dad and dating or whatever they want to do. There might be a little anxiety, I don't know how to interview for a job, but it's of a totally different kind. It's a much more manageable thing. In other words, they have put the cult experience in its past. They can go on. Now, in saying that, though, the cult experience, in a sense, is like any trauma. It's like a cow chewing its cud. They chew it, and they swallow it, and then pops back up again. Like occasionally things just come back up again that you think you dealt with in the group. Man, I dealt with this issue 3 weeks ago. Now here it is again. And that's part of the normal process of recovery. You just got to chew it up some more. You got to digest it, talk about it, process it some more. And after a while, it's gone. Now, one of the more dangerous things is to see that is short-circuited. It's short-circuited. In other words, you've got to allow these people to work through those feelings in the process of recovery. And so many well-intended Christians have given these little spiritual nuggets, like, oh, I sense you're bitter. You must forgive these people. Let me tell you, forgiveness comes after you've run your course, dealing with the anger of what there is to forgive, if anything. Otherwise, you know what happens? If you short-circuit this process, if you push forgiveness on these people at this stage, you are re-victimizing them and allowing the cult to control them all over again.
I feel like stripping them of, I not only noticed this from the cult, like you said last night, from a family, dysfunctional family system, remarkably feels like a cult. And I've noticed it in Christian experience, women are virtually stripped of all psychological abilities to create boundaries so such that you are continually, like what you're saying,
Yeah.
totally stripped of all of that.
Yeah, like in our group, she was saying that you're constantly stripped of your boundaries. It's like Jim, our cult leader, would do something wrong, and then the lesson was, brother, you need to learn love, forgiveness. You know, that's empowering the aggressor. And I think that we oftentimes have a little bit twisted view of forgiveness. Forgiveness is never an excuse to allow a person to re-victimize you again and again and again. It's not that way.
I thought, because you see, that's what I've been told. I had a situation at work where a woman persecuted me for 4 years. And at the time, I didn't know how to stand up for myself. At the time, I was stripped. It wasn't totally all my fault, but due to other experiences like religion, you know, like what you're saying, all of it. It's not just cults, it's the whole, that, you know, what you're saying. I could not go and tell on her. I didn't have any
But
way
you have to
grow a
love her.
boundary.
You must
Yeah.
forgive her.
Well, just within the last year, she was going to come back to the job. I had to, with regret, my supervisor came to me and asked me about it. And I really wasn't going to tell her, but it dawned on me, well, sweetheart, you can tell her now, you can tell her later. And you don't have a choice. You know, this woman, no loyalty. It's time for her to accept the consequences of her antisocial behavior.
That's right.
What, is that getting even? What is that?
No, I think you really can't get even.
Well, I mean, you wouldn't want to, but what is that when you finally go?
You confront them. You stand your boundaries. You say, this is wrong. I'm not going to allow you to do this again, ever.
That's what
Yes,
I
ma'am.
She mentioned this coming out of a dysfunctional family feels much like the recovery process of coming out of these cults. And you agree with that?
Yes.
Because I'm sitting here thinking of 3 different traumas I've been through or am going through, and coming out of those all feels just exactly like this. And I've never been in a cult, but coming out of traumatic experiences, especially if they're of some duration, it feels exactly like this cult thing, doesn't it?
Exactly, because the principles that are used to traumatize a person in a cult are not unique to a cult. You can have them in a dysfunctional family, of an abusive husband. You can go on and on. You can have these things. Somebody else back here. Yeah, people. If you're going to ask these questions, you're going to have to use the mics. Okay, ma'am. As far as it goes.
One of the things that I found most frustrating coming out of the group that I was in was I came directly into a church. We were lucky God led us into a church and where the minister did know something about the cult that we were in, which is Scientology. But I found it frustrating, and so did my husband, and so have many other people that we've worked with over the years since then who've come out of cults, that so many people in the churches, they're kind and they try to be friendly and stuff, but they kind of, when they find out you've been in a cult, it's like, oh, I don't want to talk to them. There must be something weird about them. It's very frustrating to deal with people who have absolutely no understanding of what you may have been through, and also to run into, we didn't run into this, but other people we know have run into leaders in the church who know nothing about the cultic process, about what the mind control, especially the mind control. They may know something about the difference between theologies, but they don't know anything about the control aspects of cults and what as we're talking about, what people go through after they come out of it.
I like what you said, that I went to a chapel of a Christian college shortly after I left my group. And I sat in his office and went on and on for 2 hours, telling him all the horrible things that happened in his group. And at the end of 2 hours, I felt like I was standing there naked. This guy had this look on his face like, I didn't think you were that kind of person. That experience shut me down for years, and even beginning to tell my story to someone else. It was just much too painful to deal with. Let me mention something. You said some of these pastors know a lot about cults and not much about mind control. It's very interesting. I've seen this system broke down with information. In other words, information from the outside. For some people, you go in there and you explain the mind control dynamics, and they see it, and bang, the whole system falls apart. For other people, you can go through that mind control stuff, and they can kind of say, so what, so what, so what? But if you really know the theology of that group, and you go in there and you really just do a number on their theology and show them how goofy it is or how incorrect it is, the whole thing comes down like a house of cards. And so in other words, what works for one person doesn't work for the other. And I think that Christians have got to realize they've got to have 2 guns and 2 holsters. And you've got to be prepared to fire both of them. And I see that again and again in working with these people is there aren't any simple solutions to recovery. There's kind of a principle that applies regardless of the system that it's in. The system, whether it's an engineering system, a military system, a chemical compound or whatever, the system that has the greatest amount of variability has the greatest amount of control. So the analogy is if you're a country and you have to set up a military defense, it's best to have an Army and Air Force and a Navy and Marines and missiles and whatever, because you've got more things you can use. Same thing in recovery. The more things you can try, the more likely one of those things is going to work. Yes? The mic, please.
I'm really glad that you're saying that, because I think that on the part of a lot of Christians has been a rejection of psychology and sociology and of wanting to look at things from that angle, but that when we're dealing with cults, you've got to be able to attack it from that side as well as from the spiritual. But I wanted to focus on that this whole thing is set up by information. It's all set up by what's communicated to the person. And the reason why it's like a dysfunctional family is that it's the communication style that's the same. And would educating people about what constitutes abusive communication and what constitutes manipulative communication just in general help to diminish people's susceptibility to this.
That's exactly right. The dysfunctional family rules like don't talk, don't trust, don't feel, don't think. They say don't talk what you want to talk, do talk what mommy and daddy want you to talk or what the church wants you to talk, right? That sets you up then for a cult that practices the same thing. In other words, you don't talk what you want to talk, you talk what daddy, mommy wants you to talk, cult leader, whatever. In other words, that's a dysfunctional communication system. People should be allowed to talk what they want to talk, what they want to say. The thing is, the same rule is don't feel, do feel. Don't feel what you're feeling. Feel what God wants you to feel. Feel what Mommy and Daddy wants you to feel. I'll remember one time my folks made a big deal out of this toy they were going to give me. And normally my folks aren't like this. And so they pull out this breakfast food box. I said, your toy is in this breakfast food box. You know, I never really looked that closely at the breakfast food box. Occasionally there's a halfway decent child's toy in a breakfast food box. But let me tell you, folks, this was not a halfway decent toy. So I fumbled through this breakfast food to pull out this miserable little toy. And I said, this is nothing but a darn old toy. And that's exactly how I felt. And guess what Mommy and Daddy said? Oh, no, you don't feel like that now, do you? You're grateful for this toy. You know? Don't feel, do feel. Well, heck, it was a darn old toy. And parents need to allow their kids to do that. Then the next one is don't think, do think. Don't think what you're thinking. Think what Mommy and Daddy want you to think, or think what the pastor wants you to think. In other words, that's exactly what's being done here. You know, don't be an apple. Be a square. Don't be a circle, be a square. Whatever. Don't be yourself. Good point. This is reminding me of one of the verses that typically is used in Bible-based cults is deny yourself. Take up your cross. Now, in cultic systems, deny yourself has become this freeze-dried, squeezed-up, smashed-down thing that they call the new sanctified spirit. In other words, strip away your talents and your feelings and your temperament and all this stuff, and this is what God wants, to deny self. When the Lord is talking about denying the self, He's not talking about squashing who you are. He's talking about the direction that you go. In other words, you either use your talents, temperament, gifts, strengths for God, for the devil. I mean, Bob Dylan was right. In that old song, he said, you got to choose somebody. It may be the devil, it may be the Lord, but you got to choose somebody. And that's right. And that's what denying yourself is. And denying yourself isn't become all shriveled up. Christ wants us to grow in our strengths and our talents and our temperaments. But then the point is stewardship. What you going to do with it? What you going to do with what's been developed in your life? With your personhood, with your talents? Are you going to squander it or whatever? Yes, sir.
I was wondering if you'd address, I've run into a situation going out and talking about a front group of Scientology I got involved in. And the cults, this is a very receptive audience, but they have influenced a lot of people in the public to think if you're out there talking about these groups, you're as bad a cult as they are because you're just trying to manipulate somebody's mind. And, you know, who are you to say that this is a cult? And it's sort of like wrestling a pig in slop. I mean, you get slop on you and the pig enjoys it. And, I mean, you go out and tell people, these people believe in space aliens and on and on. They look at you like, you're crazy. No, they don't really believe that. And, you know, I find myself, you know, find a lot of resistance. So do you have any suggestions on how to deal with that or approaches?
Don't talk to people that aren't interested. It's just that simple. Yes, ma'am.
I have one other you were talking about counseling situation with the anger and suppressing it. The other one I have found, and I've run into a lot of ex-cultists that have run into that, is I was noticing on the first page you're saying the support of former ex-cultists. But it's very hard to get pastors to recognize a group of former ex-cultists. But you've got people who are, I'm trying to think of the name, they're deliverance counseling. I came across that one, and I've run into other people who have ex-cultists. They're more than willing to send you to deliverance counseling, and I found that that was more destructive than the cult itself.
Yeah, my great uncle
Cast that spirit out.
was a missionary in Brazil.
Blame it all on himself. I deal with people like
And
that
my
all the time.
father endearingly said of old Uncle Gilbert, which would have been his uncle, not my great uncle. He said, old Uncle Gilbert stirred up more demons than he ever cast out. And I think that's kind of a joke, but that's describing what you're saying, is that people go out of the frying pan into the fire in trying to go to something, what you say. But I think you're also addressing a bigger issue, is that pastors do not recognize the need for recovery. That, we've got support groups in the church for unwed mothers and divorced parents and recovered homosexuals, and I don't know, just alcoholics and all this. And like I said in my talk last night, the cult victim, in my opinion, is the most victimized population in this nation. There's virtually no programs. In other words, I did a study once on what the government spends on drug and alcohol rehab centers. And they spend all, with research and education and rehab centers. They're budget. Their budget is well over $20 billion a year. Now, the cold problem is not as big, admittedly, it's not as big as the drug and alcohol problem, but it's about 10 to 15% is large. In other words, 2 to 3% of the people in this country are involved in cults or ex-members. And what is 2 to 3% of 250 million people? These are the minimum figures that any research data has shown. We're talking about 7.5 million people. If the government was funding in proportional to alcoholism treatment, there should be 330 rehab centers alone in this nation for recovering cultists. 330. There's one. That's mine, and the government doesn't fund it. They've never funded it for this field. Some would think, well, obviously the church is doing something. Are the funds coming from the church? Not one red penny. That's right. They send them out to the mission fields and whatever. Now, turn to the next page of your handout here. Another way of looking at the recovery is the previous page dealt with past, present, future issues. The other way of dealing with recovery has to do with read down the page. First, you realize it's a problem. Then you get some clarification. Then you take some sort of action, mobilization, re-socialization, remobilization. In other words, the recovery process also has to do with getting clarification, taking action on what's been clarified, and then re-socializing with a different group of people. And the catalyst which moves this whole thing is information. I'll say it again, it's so important. The catalyst that moves recovery is information. Now, in saying that, it's doubtful that many people are going to pick up a book or whatever that have come out of a cult and get information. That information is cradled in the hands of friendship. That information is brought to another person by love, care, and understanding. So, in other words, if someone would have told me after I had been in my group, "You've been in a cult, you need to read this book," think it would have worked? No. But if there's someone there that's listening to you, that's sympathetic to you, that's understanding of you, they're going to be in a position to give you information that you're going to pay attention to. So the other things is to look at it this way. Realization of the problem, clarification, mobilization, resocialization, remobilization. Each phase of recovery has its own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. At first, it's clear what our behaviors are. I mean, the last year I was in the cult, I did construction work. I worked full time doing construction work. I left the cult. I moved. I got a job remodeling a farmhouse. I could only work 4 hours a day. I'd go home and sleep all afternoon. And I think you see behavior somewhat like that. People that are recovering, they're just not up to par. The behaviors are just different. Then when you really begin to see people making new friends, getting a new job, going back to school, mending up relationships with the family, that's the last stage of recovery. When people are starting to do that, they're really cooking in recovery. Now, you asked the question, how long does it take? You've got to give yourself time, even with the best help. This is something that will probably not be fully healed in a year, or 2 years, or whatever. I mean, I've been out of my group for 78, 14, 16 years. There are still things that bother me. And I think that's okay. I think in the sense that it's okay to admit that maybe I'll never be quite the person I was. There's still some things that pain me after 16 years. But it doesn't stop me from doing what I'm doing. It's, in other words, before the pain would stop you, would interfere with your life. Now the pain is something that's fleeting. You recognize it, and you go on. I think it's foolish to say that you will not have any pain. It's just absolutely foolish. In fact, I think that pain is a great friend. It forever reminds you of what it's like to be exploited, manipulated, deceived. Other questions? Yes?
I'll just write it down real quickly. Could you give some sort of practical suggestions to Christians who care about recovering ex-cultists and how to help them along through these stages of recovery? Like, and could you also give a suggestion on when to leave them alone?
Excellent question. Let me get really specific and talk about a support group. Support group sounds like a good idea. Chances are it won't work. I'll be kind of pessimistic. Unless you have someone in that support group that's a lot further along in the recovery. All the people are just kind of in there, just at the same level, just groping around, and it just doesn't work. If you're going to have a support group, I would recommend one of two things. Have a professional there that knows something about the cult issue, knows something about running a support group, or at a minimum, have someone in that support group that's a designated leader that is really, is much along in their recovery. Because I have seen support group after support group after support group raise up and die away. But I think support groups are very, very important. The other thing that I would recommend is, of course, reading. Reading books that deal with the abuse of the mind control issues. From a Christian perspective, I have to say the pickings are slim to none. Unholy Devotion is out of print. The only copies I know of are down there on the table. That's a good one. My book and Ron Enroth's book are the only two that, this is really saying something. Of all the zillions of books out there on cults, written from a Christian perspective, how many deal with mind control and abuse? 2. What's that?
That's probably true.
It is. I only know of 2. That's Ron Enroth's book, Churches That Abuse, and my book called Proofing the Kids. Now, there's some secular books out there that are excellent. I've got a copy down here of Steve Hassan's book, Combating Cult Mind Control. It's a classic. It's an excellent book. I recommend all of those books if you've been in a cult experience like that. One of the other things that is really, really important to do in recovery, see these areas here that were kind of smashed and cut away? In the process of recovery, it's very important for the person to re-identify those issues that might have been considered sinful, ungodly, or whatever in the group, and own up to them. Now, let me tell you a couple of the areas of my life that were cut out. In case you didn't know it, I'm a jokester. I like to tell jokes. In fact, I haven't told one joke yet. I'll tell it right now. It's once been said, if you take all the cult seminar leaders, take them down to the equator, lay them down, head to foot, head to foot, head to foot, just leave them all there. Oh, you're supposed to laugh. That's a bad joke. Well, anyway, I like to tell jokes. I like to play jokes. I have a dry sense of humor. And one of the very righteous leaders in my group came up to me in a very holy, sanctimonious way and opened up the scriptures and nailed me with a verse in Ecclesiastes and said, "Dead flies make a perfumer's oil stink. So is a little folly in the mouth of a wise man." In other words, they were saying, for you to be godly, you can't be yourself. You can't tell jokes. You can't goof around. That's just like taking an arm and cutting it off. Some people are just naturally just kind of goofy, offy, and whatever. That was considered ungodly. The other thing is that I've always been kind of an outdoors person. I always liked to hunt, fish, canoe, all that kind of stuff. And in our group, God only existed in cities and college campuses. There was no justifiable reason to be out in the countryside. That's hard for a kid that was raised in a small town in Nebraska where you could get on your bicycle and be out in the fields in 2 minutes from your front door. And, you know, you all have examples from your own experience, but what's very important in recovery is help those persons re-identify those things that were a part of their life before the cult experience. And affirm it. See, there's nothing unspiritual about that. And support it with Scripture. Yes, ma'am.
One of the things, I was brought up in the Jehovah's Witnesses, and I got out of there when I was 38 years old. And so I didn't have, I couldn't go back to something that I had left behind before. But one of the things that this reminded me of was, after getting out, I got my identity as an American for the first time. And I went, now wait a minute, I'm an American citizen. And then I thought, why isn't there a law against what they did to me?
That's good. And I think that points out that even if a person has been raised in a cult, there's some things they can begin to claim. And actually, maybe if they go back and look at their history in the cult, they begin to see that there were things in the cult that maybe they enjoyed as a child that just were kind of squelched or whatever. Not necessarily, but sometimes. But anyway, for situations in which you can identify those, it is so healing to say, hey, that's okay. That's okay, that's good. That's not a sin. Enjoy that. Yes, ma'am. Okay.
I have two questions. I know a person who is a Zen priest, and I'm just learning what it's all about. So my question is, how do you deal with a person like that, and how do you get them to see the truth? And my second question is, okay, so if the cult is real, I said, I know from the previous lecture you said anyone could fall into that. But my thinking is that there must have been something missing within or something along the line that caused another person to go into the occult system.
Okay, question one, she's got a Zen friend priest, and how do you help them? What I say is that you do a little fishing. And if they're nibbling, feed them a little more. If they're not nibbling, pull your line up and just keep your bridges built. And don't force it. I have found out that it backfires if you force information on people if they're not ready and willing to hear it. If they're ready and willing to hear it, then talk. So I always kind of test people out. And if they're not willing and ready, I wait. Like there was a situation where I didn't say a whole lot to the group in Kansas City, which I had come out from. And I kind of kept a low profile. I had a lot to say. I would occasionally go into town and say hi to these people, maybe go over to their home. And one day I got the proverbial phone call saying, we've really got some problems here. Paul, we got to talk. So he got in the car with his wife. They drove out to Ohio. We talked literally day and night for 3 days. And I just unloaded everything that I had. And he was like one of the deacons in the church by that point. So he went back, and they were ready to listen. So he called a meeting, and to make a long story short, 95% of the people left the church. It sounds awful, you know. It was the greatest thing in the world. They finally saw the light. But I'll tell you, if I would have tried to blow my horn earlier, it would have just hardened their resolve that this guy's got problems and you're right. 7 years, they drove out, and as a result of that meeting, within a period of a month, virtually, the group just disbanded almost. There was a few that stayed. But be patient. And then the other question, is there something missing in these people's lives? I'm going to answer yes to that. But I'm also going to qualify it by saying that all of us at times go through struggles. We've lost a job, we've moved away from home, we've broken up with a boyfriend, the school we wanted to be accepted in rejected us or whatever. We were going to get a football scholarship and we broke our knee or whatever. In other words, everyone has those setbacks, those losses in life. And it is true that the people that join cults have recently undergone a loss. But the thing is, all of us have gone through losses. We break up with a girlfriend, we move away from home, we graduate from college. That is a more vulnerable time to be recruited, because when we've experienced a loss like that, we naturally are seeking out friendship. People that can talk to us. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. Yes, sir.
I have a question for people that are in contact with cult people on a regular basis. And we receive telephone calls. We have a telephone ministry in the Atlanta area. And when people call in, I recognize for the most part, I may have a few minutes on that telephone. And a couple of times I was able to send the person a video. They weren't ready to have contact with somebody, but they were willing to take a video and watch it. Is there any kind of videos that could be generated to people like us from people like you? We can never duplicate the professional quality of trying to do what you do. But if someone would call us and we say, we have a video, would you let us send it to us? You could be such a big help to us, people like you.
Good idea. There is very little. In fact, there's nothing in the way of a video that I know of on recovery. There is.
Somebody's looking for a video on recovery. What do you want to accomplish with the video? Is it about recovery or getting them out of the cult or helping them understand mind control? What is it that you want the video to do?
Well, you have to understand that when a person calls, they've already jeopardized a great deal in that telephone. So that means they have doubts.
That's right.
And they have fears.
Right.
And at that moment, you need something that is going to help them, to kind of say, get over the hump.
Right.
Either decide that they're going to stay in that group and just suffer what they're feeling, or whether they're going to reach out to somebody. Because, like the last phone call I had, the next to last phone call I had, the woman said that she just feels so guilty. She said she was trembling while she was talking to me on the telephone. She said, I don't even know why I'm talking to you. Of course, we know why. She was reaching out.
That's right.
But at that point, she would not leave me her address, her telephone number. She gave me her name. But had I had something to offer her, she was afraid of any personal contact. But could I have said to her, well, I have a video. You know, I could send, these people have already experienced what you're experienced, and they've come out. Of course, I gave her some positive, I gave her a positive perspective on life, that there is an alternative for a person like you. And that alternative is Jesus Christ, Him, instead of an organization.
The Cult Awareness Network has a conference every year in different parts of the nation. They have a national conference in the fall. And those videotapes are for sale.
Yeah.
And they always have an ex-member panel. In fact, they usually have two ex-member panels, one for those recently been out and one for those that have been out for a longer period of time, so that there's a perspective on that. And so Cult Awareness Network would have 10 years worth of conferences on tapes from ex-members and just telling their story from a variety of different groups. There's usually a panel of maybe 4, 5, or 6 people, and each person tells their story of what it was like being in the cult and what they went through getting out. And that might be a valuable resource, but as far as an actual educational video on what are people going through when they're thinking about leaving a group, there is a video about mind control done by the International Cult Education Program, but it's mostly like a cult prevention thing, and I don't think it would be very helpful. But I would tend to think that videotapes from former members really help that person identify.
But do you think that would be the right step to take at that point?
I think so. I do. Other questions?
When they compress a person, is that a form of induced schizophrenia almost?
I call it induced dependency. You're taught to depend on other people rather than your own internal strengths for who you are and for your rewards and whatever. Let me close by saying this about recovery. Recovery is a combination of crisis and opportunity. If you seize the opportunity, I feel that it's more than feel. I know that recovered cultists are one of the most valuable resources in the church today, for a variety of reasons. One reason is you really can sympathize with people who've gone through pain and anguish and suffering. You know what it's like. And secondly, it really has a way of getting one's theology right, like no Bible school or seminary ever would. It seems like once you've just been beat to death with the law, the contrast of seeing the grace of God is so great. I think that the best team of future pastors would be recovered, for those taking the opportunity of recovering from the cult, of seeing the freshness of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and being able to really empathize with the pains of others. So in this room, the potential for ministry, for leadership, is really great in time. And it takes time to recover. You know, I kept thinking that, oh, Lord, how long is this going to be? How long is this going to be? It was 7 years for me, but I realized that, a lot of things had to be worked through during that time. I did a lot of soul searching. And for many, it would seem like they were wasted years. But I don't think we can say that in the light of God's purposes and God's plan, that these are wasted years. So it can be a crisis, or it can be an opportunity, depending on the choices we make and the decisions we make in our recovery process. That wraps it up. Thank you for being a very attentive audience, and if any of you have some questions, I'll be around.